The housing subsidies announced in the President's State of the Nation address that's here in South Africa and the Finance Minister's budget speech may well represent, arguably, the single biggest policy change to date. Joining us now to discuss the social impact of affordable housing here in South Africa is Professor Francois Viruly. He's a property economist and professor at the University of Cape Town. Professor, I'm not going to ask what you're doing here in Joburg, but let's talk about affordable housing.
Right. Yeah.
And let's talk about what you are characterizing as a big policy shift in terms of the government's stance on affordable housing. Just explain to us what you see as the major change here.
I think that we are starting to see important changes in the debate. If you look over the last 10, 15 years, the focus has very much been at the very lowest end of the market. In South Africa, the RDP housing, which is largely a giveaway home to the poorest of society. But I think what we're starting to realize is that the whole property market has to function well.
Sure.
In other words, we have to find a scenario where people who are increasingly moving out of those RDP houses can acquire a house at a higher level in the housing ladder. So I think what we're starting to see, and we've seen it in the budget as well recently, is government starting to say, hey, that gap market, the market just above that, how do we make that work more efficiently? If that works more efficiently, people can move in that, and it makes supply available at the very lowest end of the market. So
what's the sense you're getting? Is this just an accident, or are we seeing a deliberate policy shift and a realization by the government that you have to create this new environment?
Godfrey, I think that's exactly it. I think that the argument is that, and the figures have come out in South Africa, that there's a growing middle class in South Africa, and that middle class has to be housed. If you don't handle that, you run this enormous risk that some of the problems that you face presently at the very low end of the market, you also face in that middle market. So really, I think what is becoming clear is that we have to supply that middle market, often called the affordable market, because if you don't supply that market, it becomes unaffordable.
So you are describing it as the gap in the housing market. Let's define it.
Yeah, it is a gap. You know, I think where one faces problems is that if you're poor, you receive a subsidized housing.
Okay.
If you're not poor enough,
you have to go to the banks.
You have to go to the banks. So you can almost find yourself in a scenario where you almost can't get a house because you're not poor enough.
Sure.
And I think that that's what we want to try to avoid. And therefore, I think we're starting to see opportunities in that gap market. And I think it is that gap market where the financial sector has a role. We've been doing some work with private equity. I think there are more and more investors who are looking at the opportunities in that market and are seeing the returns.
How big is it? How big is that market?
Well, it's an interesting point. We certainly know that there's a shortfall of about 600,000 units, maybe even more. And I think what we want to avoid is that gets worse. So I think that is the shift that is happening. And I think there's a greater realization that the housing market is not just about a single sector of the market, but that you have to see the housing market in its totality. The housing market, which has a low end, middle end, and some of the highest properties in Cape Town and elsewhere.
Very quickly, Professor, now you have conducted a survey where you tried to look at this whole affordable housing scenario. What did you find?
Do you know what that research was about? Is we often talk of human settlements. We've got to create not just housing, but we've got to create communities functioning. So what this research did, it went and asked particular people in houses which the International Housing Solution has invested in, which a private equity has invested in, and we asked, are you better off? And the one thing that surprised me in this study was over 70% of the people said, I've moved into a better home and it's improved my health.
Absolutely.
In other words, housing is to some degree a health policy.
It is. It is. Absolutely. Where you come from is important indeed. Professor Francois Viruly, property economist, thanks very much indeed for finding the time to come to talk to us here in Johannesburg about affordable housing.